Hi everyone, and welcome to another Teach Tuesday video. Today's Teach Tuesday video is going to be something a little bit different. Today we're just going to do a top 10 list of good practices in writing multiple choice assessments. Things to be aware of and how to write good questions. So without further ado, we'll start with number 10, which is watch for accidental clues to the correct answer. So watch for a and an, pronouns, capitalization, bolding and italicizing, that sort of thing. In the example on the screen here, we have the correct answer is capitalized while the other ones are not. So that's something to watch out for. Kind of an easy one. Number 9 in the top 10 is avoid negative questions. So negative questions are confusing and don't do as well as checking what students know. So which is not questions are actually pretty good for formative assessments. So if you're trying to actually teach with the quiz or the exam, they're actually a good thing to use. But if you're trying to assess for what students know, they don't actually tell you much. Versus that I'll point out one exception to this rule, which is that sometimes what you're actually trying to get from the students is being able to identify something that is not. So in this case, you never want to put water on a grease fire. It directly aligns to the course objective to not pick that answer. Okay, number 8, sorry, make all of the answer choices plausible. So this may mean that you only need 2 or 3 choices, and that's fine. But by all accounts, avoid especially silly answers. So in this case, Fred Flintstone, because while it might be amusing to you, sometimes students can actually be put off by that. If they, say if we were studying, in this case, artists of the 1960s, and they remembered the Barbera cartoons, Fred Flintstone might have been familiar to them. They might have picked that answer, and then later they might feel a little bit foolish for having done so. Okay, now number 7, don't use all or none of the above if you can avoid it. So the reason for that is all tells students that they only need to identify a couple of the correct answers and know that it's all of them. And then none of the above doesn't tell you if the students actually know what one of the correct answers would be to what you're trying to get at. Okay, number 6, don't try to be tricky. And the other side of that coin is watch out for loopholes. So in the example, how many letters are in the Greek alphabet, the correct answer is 24, but there's actually 48 if you count lowercase and uppercase, and there's also 18 if you count the first 18 and then the rest of them. Rewriting that question in the second format here, how many characters are there in the Greek alphabet? In this case, we have 48, and then we specify 24 in both lower and upper cases. And then here's another example where we only really needed 3 answers, and it's still a pretty good question. Okay. Number 5, make choices homogeneous but non-overlapping. What on earth does that mean? I used an example here to explain it. So the question asks something about presidents, so don't include Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton as potential answers. That said, also watch out for synonymous answers. So here, Bacchus and Dionysus are the same, Mercury and Hermes are the same, they just happen to be Greek or Roman. If that information, whether they were Greek or Roman, isn't particular to the question, make sure that you're leaving that information out, or you're not using it in an attempt to distract the students into picking one answer choice or the other. Because if they know that the answer is the mythological god of wine, then they don't know necessarily. They might know the correct answer, but not know whether it's Bacchus or Dionysus. Similarly, if they know that it is not Mercury or Hermes, they only need to know it's not one of them, and then know that those are the same thing. And they've already eliminated 2 choices. Okay. And then sort of a bonus here is that you can actually control the difficulty of a question by making a different selection of homogeneous choices, right? So in these couple of sample questions, they both are looking for Taylor as the president is to the answer to the question. But the first question is a little bit more difficult because it goes Tyler, Polk, Taylor, and Fillmore, who were consecutive presidents, versus Washington, Taylor, Coolidge, and Reagan, which were much more spread out over history. Number 4, ask questions a student could answer without the choices. So this is just looking at the example. Which of these was not an area of study of Marcel Mauss? I don't know, because I don't know what these are yet. Versus what social feature did Marcel Mauss study by using the potlatch as a specific example? A student could write that answer in, not given answer choices. And so sort of a bonus tip here, you can shorten the amount of time a student needs to take the exam by shortening the amount of time that they need to spend reading the answers. So if they can think of the answer and recall it and then be able to identify that answer from the choices, instead of having to eliminate choices, they can take less time taking the exam. The less time they need to take the exam, the more likely you can give them less time to take the exam. And then it deters them from using their book because they can't look up every answer. Then use higher level thinking, number 3. So put knowledge in a new context rather than relying on recall. Sort of, if you think of Bloom's taxonomy as a pyramid, working your way up the pyramid as far as you can go with multiple choice questions. So rather than identifying a word from a definition, for example, provide them the word and have them identify items that fit the definition of that word. And this also cuts down on the cheating, quite frankly, if you're worried about students using their book. It's very easy to give them a word and say, what's the definition? They just have to go look up the definition in the book. But if you ask them to apply a term, having an understanding of the definition, that information isn't necessarily going to be in the book. They'll have to move up that ladder or that pyramid. Number 2, the glass here is transparent. So if you're writing good multiple choice questions, you are in the minority of test writers. So students might not be familiar with that type of multiple choice question. They might be used to being able to go look up in the book what the answer is. So be clear to students, in particular, how much time they're given, but also how much time you expect it will take them to complete the exam. And then which materials are going to be covered. Was it the textbook? Was it lecture? Was it both? And then which chapters? Is it cumulative? That sort of thing. And then being that if you're in the online environment, you want to acknowledge the fact that there really is no such thing as a closed note, closed book exam in the online environment. But having written good questions, you'll be able to tell them that they won't be able to look up every answer in the book because these are application questions. So telling them these are application questions on this material and expect that it'll take you this amount of time. And then reducing the amount of time that they need to spend on the exam can help so that they don't have to, they can't look up every answer. And just being upfront about that. It's a good opportunity to remind them that they won't be able to look up all the answers. So, and then number 1, put your course objectives to work for you. So consider what it is that you want to check for. Ask the question. Again, asking a question that they could answer without the answer choices. And then what would the student who met your course objectives give as the answer to that question? That's the correct answer. And then what would the other students say that didn't meet the course objective? Those are your distractor answers. And you can go back and use maybe discussions that you had in class or previous versions of the exam. Use the answers that students think are the correct answers but are not, because those are the ones that they're going to select. And then try to use terms or phrases. This is again sort of a bonus. Terms or phrases that students will recognize from lecture or the text and that sort of thing, but are not the correct answer, rather than making answers up. So this goes back to sort of the homogeneous thing. If you're studying U.S. presidents, make sure all the answers are U.S. presidents, and particularly ones that have been mentioned in lecture or in the book, because they're familiar. So that was my top 10 multiple choice assessment tips. And then next week, hopefully we'll have another top 10 for you about another timely Teach Tuesday topic.